It started like any other Friday morning in Winona, Minnesota. A quiet town, small enough for everyone to know each other's names. The kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and trusted their neighbors. But on March 31st, 2023, that sense of peace shattered. Madeline Kingsbury, a 26-year-old mother of two, dropped her kids off at daycare around 8 a.m. She smiled at the teachers, kissed her children goodbye, and promised to see them later that afternoon. It was an ordinary promise, one every parent makes. But for Madeline, it would be the last one she ever made. When Dinty returned to pick up her kids that evening, daycare staff knew something was wrong. Madeline wasn't the kind of mom who forgot. She wasn't the kind who disappeared. Her phone went silent. Her car stayed parked at home. Her wallet, her jacket, everything she owned was still inside. But she was gone. By sunset, her family was in full panic. Calls went unanswered. Messages turned to voicemails. Police were contacted that night, launching one of the most extensive missing-person searches the small town had ever seen. Hundreds of volunteers came forward. Posters covered every street. A $50,000 reward was announced. Everyone wanted to believe she'd just walked away for a while. But deep down, no one really believed that. Madeline wasn't just another face on a flyer. She was a mother, a daughter, a sister, and a friend. She worked remotely for the Mayo Clinic, balancing her career and motherhood with quiet strength. Her life revolved around her two young children, ages 5 and 2, and those who knew her described her as patient, soft-spoken, and full of love. So when the story broke, mother of two missing after dropping off her kids, it wasn't just another headline. It was every parent's nightmare. The entire community came together, searching forests, lakes, and trails, hoping to find a clue, a footprint, anything. But as days turned into weeks, hope began to fade. And behind the public search, detectives started noticing inconsistencies, small things that didn't add up. Her ex-partner's timeline, the missing hours that morning, the phone data that suddenly stopped. Something dark was hiding beneath the surface. Because this wasn't just a disappearance, it was the beginning of a murder investigation that would expose secrets, lies, and a history of control and fear no one saw coming. This is the story of Madeline Kingsbury, the young mother who vanished without a trace. The investigation that gripped a nation, and the chilling truth that finally came to light. The morning of March 31st, 2023, began quietly inside Madeline Kingsbury's home on West 7th Street in Winona. It was the kind of chilly Minnesota morning where the air still carried a hint of frost, and the sun hadn't yet burned away the fog. Inside, Madeline was getting her two little ones ready for daycare. She packed their bags, tied shoelaces, poured cereal, and moved with the calm rhythm of a mother who'd done this 100 times before. By 8 a.m., she and her children climbed into her dark, blue Chrysler minivan. Her ex-boyfriend, Adam Fravel, the father of her children, was also there that morning. They had broken up months earlier, but were still living together, a situation that friends described as tense, but manageable. Madeline had been making plans to move out for good. Surveillance cameras from a nearby intersection captured the van leaving for the daycare. Madeline, smiling faintly, dropped off her two children just after 8 a.m. Witnesses later said she looked calm, normal, like nothing was wrong. But as she said goodbye, no one could have guessed it would be the last time anyone saw her alive. After the drop-off, she returned home with Adam around 8:15 a.m. according to him. She went inside, while he took her van to run some errands. He claimed that when he returned later that morning, she was gone. Her phone, wallet, and jacket still in the house. He said he assumed she'd gone out with friends, but Madeline never came back. At 1 p.m., her coworkers noticed something strange. She hadn't logged into a remote job at the Mayo Clinic. No emails. No texts. No calls. That was completely unlike her. By 4 p.m., her family was calling. By 7 p.m., panic set in. Her sister, Megan, called the police. When officers entered the home, they found no signs of forced entry or struggle. Everything was in its place, except Madeline. Her car was gone, but her phone had gone silent just after 8:30 a.m. That single fact would later become one of the biggest clues in the case. By nightfall, police began their first grid search. Dozens of volunteers gathered flashlights and walked through nearby woods and trails, calling her name into the darkness. Every minute that passed without a sign of her deepened the dread. The next morning, detectives pulled surveillance footage from nearby roads. What they saw started to unravel Adam's story. Around 9:15 a.m., Madeline's minivan was seen driving through Winona, but not with her behind the wheel. The footage showed a man matching Adam's build, alone in the vehicle. Hours later, that same van was parked back outside Madeline's home. If Adam's story was true that he left briefly and returned, where had he gone for those missing hours? And why was Madeline's phone dead before he came back? As detectives questioned him, he remained calm, emotionless, claiming innocence. But investigators quietly began building a timeline, one that would lead them to a horrifying discovery months later. For now, all they knew was this: a young mother vanished in broad daylight, leaving behind 2 children, a silent phone, and a trail that was already starting to grow cold. And as the search widened, suspicion began to turn toward the one person who claimed to love her most. By April 1st, the small city of Winona, Minnesota, was no longer quiet. Flyers with Madeline's photo covered gas stations, stop signs, and coffee shops. Her face, smiling, kind, unmistakably hopeful, stared back at everyone who passed. Search groups formed within hours. Neighbors who'd never met before were now combing through wooded trails together, calling her name into the cold spring air. The Winona Police Department and the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension took charge of the investigation almost immediately. From the start, they knew this case was different. Madeline wasn't a runaway, and there were no signs she'd left on her own. Her phone had stopped transmitting data at 8:15 a.m., just minutes after returning home from the daycare. Her digital footprint went dead. No texts, no calls, nothing. Investigators began reconstructing the timeline down to the minute. They obtained surveillance footage from nearby roads and security cameras across Winona. In one clip, her blue Chrysler minivan was seen heading south around 9:15 a.m. A single person was inside. The driver, but not Madeline. That driver, detectives soon confirmed, was Adam Fravel. When questioned, Adam claimed he used the van that morning for errands to drop something off, and came back to find Madeline gone. He said he assumed she had left the house on her own, but police weren't convinced. There was no sign she'd taken a ride, no activity on her credit cards or phone, and no messages to anyone about plans to leave. Her family was adamant Madeline would never leave her kids. Days passed. The search expanded. Hundreds of volunteers joined ground searches that stretched for miles. Law enforcement used K-9 units, drones, and boats to scan fields, rivers, and rural The Mississippi River and its surrounding bluffs became key focus areas. Still, nothing. Not a single trace. Then came the digital evidence. Cell tower data placed Adam's phone and Madeline's van along a rural stretch of Highway 43 near Maybelle, Minnesota, roughly 45 miles south of Winona. It was a remote, wooded area. Sparse traffic, easy to disappear into. Detectives started to suspect that something terrible had happened there. Meanwhile, Adam's behavior during the search drew public scrutiny. He didn't join community search efforts. He avoided the media. When asked to help investigators, he refused to allow his children to be interviewed without a lawyer present. He also released a short statement saying he was cooperating fully. But detectives knew he wasn't. Behind the scenes, evidence began to stack up. Friends came forward, describing the couple's rocky relationship, the arguments, the threats, the moments of control. One friend recalled Madeline saying Adam once warned her she'd end up like Gabby Petito if she ever left him. To the outside world, it looked like a simple disappearance. But to investigators, it was now clearly something else. A case of domestic violence that had escalated into something far darker. By early May, more than 2,000 volunteers had searched for Madeline. Her family continued to plead publicly for information, their voices breaking under exhaustion and grief. And then, after 68 days of searching, on June 7, 2023, everything changed. In a remote area off Highway 43, near the small town of Maybelle, Search teams found what they had been dreading: human remains wrapped in a gray fitted bedsheet, secured with black tape and a towel around the neck. The next day, the medical examiner confirmed what everyone already feared. It was Madeline Kingsbury. Her death was ruled a homicide, caused by homicidal violence, likely asphyxiation, and from that moment on, the search for a missing person became a hunt for a killer. June 8, 2023, the day after Madeline's body was found. Police moved fast. Detectives had waited over 2 months, building a case piece by piece. Now, with forensic confirmation, they made their move. That afternoon, Adam Fravel was arrested at a home in Mabel, Minnesota, the same small town where Madeline's body had been discovered. Inside the evidence room, investigators laid out what they had gathered over weeks of work: phone data, surveillance footage, forensic samples, and witness statements. Each detail painted a clearer picture of what really happened that March morning. Cell phone records placed both Adam S. and Madeline S. devices together in Winona around 8:15 a.m. Then, within minutes, her phone went silent. Adam's phone and her minivan began traveling south between 9 a.m. and 10:30 a.m. Both were tracked along Highway 43, deep into rural Minnesota, the exact same area where her body would later be found. Investigators also recovered fragments of black tape and fibers consistent with the sheet she was wrapped in. They matched items found inside Adam's home. Forensic teams located DNA traces linking him to the crime scene. Neighbors reported seeing Adam loading items into the van that morning. When questioned, he insisted he didn't know where Madeline was and denied any involvement. But digital forensics contradicted him at every turn. Text messages revealing tension, browser searches suggesting fear of separation, and phone activity gaps aligning perfectly with the time of death. Police pieced together the likely sequence. An argument turned violent after returning from daycare. Madeline's attempt to leave the relationship had finally pushed Adam to the edge. In a moment of rage, he killed her, then used her own van to hide her body miles away. When investigators presented the evidence, Adam showed little emotion. He told officers, "I didn't do anything," even as the proof surrounded him. But the case had become airtight. In June 2023, Adam Fravel was charged with 4 counts, 2 of first-degree murder and 2 of second-degree murder. The charges reflected both premeditation and intent. Prosecutors argued that he planned it, that he couldn't stand losing control over the woman who was finally ready to move on. As the case unfolded, the community that had once searched for Madeline in hope now gathered in mourning. Candlelight vigils replaced search grids. Posters once marked missing were replaced with a single word: justice. The investigation was complete. The truth, no matter how painful, was now undeniable. And for the first time in months, Madeline's family had answers, but no relief. To understand why Madeline Kingsbury's life ended the way it did, detectives had to go back years before the day she disappeared, because the truth wasn't hidden in one morning's argument. It was buried in a long, painful pattern. Madeline met Adam Fravel around 2016. They were young, in love, and soon building a family together. On the outside, things looked normal: a smiling couple, 2 children, a small home in Winona. But friends later said the picture-perfect family was only a shell hiding something much darker. Behind closed doors, Madeline lived with control, manipulation, and fear. She confided in close friends that Adam was short-tempered, that arguments could explode without warning. There were moments she'd text friends saying she felt trapped. Not physically, but emotionally. One friend recalled Madeline once saying, "If I ever try to leave, he'll lose it." Over time, that fear became reality. Friends noticed bruises. Family members saw her growing quieter, more withdrawn. She made excuses for his behavior, saying he was just stressed, especially after losing work during the pandemic. But the truth was harder. Adam depended on her financially, emotionally, and practically. Madeline was the one working full-time at the Mayo Clinic. She paid bills, managed the kids' daycare, and held the household together while Adam stayed home. According to testimony later revealed in court, their relationship had been on and off for years. They had broken up several times, but every time she tried to separate permanently, he'd find a way back in. In early 2023, Madeline made a decision that would change everything. She was planning to move out for good. She had found a new place for herself and the kids. She told friends she was finally ready to start over. She even looked into custody arrangements. And that's when things began to escalate. Friends recalled hearing about disturbing moments. One night, Adam allegedly told her she'd end up like Gabby Petito, the young woman whose murder had shocked the nation in 2021. It wasn't just a threat. It was a prophecy of what would soon happen. Text messages entered into evidence later showed Madeline confronting him about his temper. He'd respond coldly, sometimes apologizing, sometimes deflecting blame. One message from her read, "You scare me when you get angry." In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, she confided in her sister Megan that she didn't feel safe. Megan told investigators she was scared of him. She just wanted to get away, but Adam wasn't ready to lose control. Every sign of independence from her new plans, new job ideas, even small acts of separation, enraged him. He had built his identity around her, and now that she was leaving, his world was collapsing. Prosecutors later described his motive simply power. When he realized she was leaving for good, he made sure she never would. The crime wasn't a sudden explosion. It was the end result of years of control, fear, and emotional decay. A man who couldn't let go, a woman who tried to start over, and 2 children left to grow up without either parent. It was never just about anger. It was about ownership, and what happens when love turns into possession. After Madeline's body was discovered, the peaceful community of Winona could no longer pretend this was just another missing persons case. The truth was out, and the courtroom would soon hear the full story of what really happened on March 31st, 2023. In July 2023, just weeks after her remains were found, Adam Fravel was formally charged with second-degree murder. The charges were based on a mountain of circumstantial and digital evidence. His inconsistent statements to police, cell phone records that contradicted his timeline, surveillance footage, placing his van near the disposal site, and forensic findings, fibers, soil samples, and trace DNA that tied him directly to the scene. Prosecutors painted a chilling picture. They said Fravel killed Madeline in their home, possibly during an argument about her decision to leave him, then disposed of her body while pretending to search for her. The most haunting evidence wasn't physical, it was emotional. Texts, voice messages, and witness testimonies all revealed a relationship poisoned by control. One investigator said in court, "This wasn't a random act of violence. It was the inevitable end of a man who refused to let go." Adam's defense team tried to argue there was no direct evidence linking him to the death. No eyewitness. No murder weapon. They said investigators built a narrative, not a case. But the jury didn't see it that way. As weeks of testimony passed, the story became painfully clear. Madeline had wanted to leave. Adam wanted control. And on that final morning, when she dropped off her kids and returned home, she walked into the last argument of her life. In May 2024, after nearly a year of legal back and forth, Adam Fravel was found guilty of murdering Madeline Kingsbury. The courtroom fell silent as the verdict was read. On one side sat her grieving family, her sister Megan holding back tears. On the other, the man who had once been part of that family, now in handcuffs. Judge's words were brief but heavy. Greater than this was not a crime of passion. It was a crime of control, and its consequences will echo for generations. Fravel was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Outside the courthouse, Madeline's family made a statement, not about revenge, but remembrance. Her sister said softly, "Greater than we can finally bring her home." She was loved. She was brave, and she deserved so much more. The trial closed one chapter, but did Cole done? Erase the loss. Madeline's 2 children are now being raised by her family, growing up with stories of the mother who fought for a better life and whose name became a symbol of strength in the face of fear. Madeline Kingsbury's story didn't end in the courtroom. It began echoing through homes, social media, and hearts across America, especially among women who saw their own silent struggles reflected in hers. After her death, thousands shared her story under the hashtag Justice for Maddi, turning her name into a rallying cry for awareness about intimate partner violence, a subject too often buried under silence and fear. In the weeks following the verdict, Winona transformed from a quiet Minnesota town into a symbol of collective vigilance. Local organizations launched new outreach programs to support victims of domestic abuse. Shelters saw an increase in calls, not from strangers, but from women saying, "Greater than I saw what happened to Madeline. I don't want to be next." Police departments across the state began reevaluating how they handle missing person cases involving domestic partners. Many added early risk assessments and domestic violence task forces to ensure that warning signs aren't overlooked again. Madeline's family also started a foundation in her name, dedicated to helping single parents and raising awareness about emotional and physical abuse. The foundation's motto says everything about who she was: greater than kindness, courage, and coming home. What made her story so powerful wasn't just its tragedy. It was the pattern it exposed. Behind closed doors, countless women live under quiet control, manipulation, or fear, believing they're overreacting or imagining the danger. Madeline's story forced people to confront a harsh truth. Abuse isn't always visible until it's too late. The case also influenced online creators, journalists, and true crime storytellers. Many began telling her story responsibly, avoiding sensationalism and focusing instead on her humanity, her dreams, her children, and the lessons she left behind. Her disappearance had once divided the internet. Theories, debates, endless speculation. But after her truth came out, something rare happened. Empathy replaced curiosity. One local reporter summed it up perfectly during a candlelight vigil. Greater than Madeline Kingsbury didn't just make headlines. She made people listen to the stories we usually ignore. And for her family, that's what keeps her alive. Not in the memory of how she died, but in how her story continues to protect others from the same fate. The case was over. The courtroom was empty. The noise had faded, and for the first time in over a year, the Kingsbury family could finally breathe. In late summer, the sun dipped low over Winona, Minnesota, painting the river gold. The same riverbanks where hundreds had once searched for her. Now, the same hands that held flashlights and missing posters carried candles and white roses. It wasn't a search anymore. It was a homecoming. Madeline Kingsbury was finally laid to rest, surrounded by her family, friends, and the community that refused to forget her. There were no cameras that day, no police tape, just silence, the kind that feels sacred. Her sister, Megan, stood by her grave and whispered, "Greater than your home now, Maddie. We did it. Your home." Her two little children were there, too young to understand the full story, but old enough to know that their mother was loved by everyone around them. They placed small purple flowers on her grave, because purple had been her favorite color. The story of Madeline Kingsbury isn't just a tragedy. It's a reflection, a reminder of how fragile safety can be, even in the places we call home. But it's also a story of strength, of how love, truth, and community can rise stronger than fear. Every year since, people gather to light candles in her memory, and to speak the names of other women who never made it home. And each time a family says the same words, "Greater than Madeline's light will never fade." As the documentary closes, we see the soft glow of candles floating on the Mississippi River, one for every life changed by her story. Her voice may be gone, but her message remains. If you ever feel unsafe, speak. If you ever see someone in danger, act, because silence protects no one. And then, as the screen fades to black, the final line appears. In loving memory of Madeline Kingsbury, a daughter, a mother, a sister, and a light that still guides home. When the noise fades and justice has been served, what remains are the lessons we often overlook until it's too late. Madeline's story isn't just about what happened, it's about why it happened, and how many silent red flags were missed along the way. Because domestic violence doesn't always start with bruises. It begins quietly, in control, in manipulation, in isolation. Madeline's friends later said that Adam had slowly taken control of her life. Who she talked to, where she went, and what she shared. He had a way of making her question herself, her worth, her independence. And that's how control works. It hides under the mask of love, until it becomes a cage. Experts say, the most dangerous time for a woman in an abusive relationship is when she decides to leave. And Madeline was trying to do just that, to move out, to start fresh, to reclaim herself. But abusers often see freedom as betrayal. And that's when love turns lethal. In every community, in every country, stories like Madeline's unfold. Different names, same silence. It's the silence that kills, the fear of judgment, the belief that he'll change, the thought that maybe it's not that bad. But when we stay silent, violence grows in the dark. So this part of the story isn't for the headlines, it's for you. And for the rest of us, the friends, the neighbors, the bystanders, we have a responsibility to notice, to ask, to step in. Madeline's light doesn't end in tragedy. It becomes a warning and a call to awareness for millions who still live in the shadows of fear. Because sometimes saving a life begins with just one question, greater than "Are you okay?" and one person willing to hear the truth. Every true crime story ends the same way, with names, dates, and verdicts. But this one lingers, because behind every headline is a heartbeat, a mother, a friend, a daughter whose story deserved more than an ending. Madeline Kingsbury wasn't just another case. She was laughter echoing through a kitchen, a mother who never missed a bedtime story, a woman who dreamed of better days and almost made it there. And even though her life was stolen, her voice became louder than ever, carried by every person who said, "Not again." When you tell her story, you keep her alive. When you recognize the signs, when you speak up, when you choose empathy over ignorance, you continue her fight. Because real justice isn't just what happens in courtrooms. It's what we choose to change in our lives after the verdict is read. So tonight, as this story fades to black, remember Madeline. Remember the light she left behind. And if you ever see someone walking through what she once did, don't look away. Because sometimes you're the only one who can make sure the next story doesn't end the same way. Greater than remember her name, protect others. Choose compassion.